Hi everyone, let's solve this GATE question. This is GATE 2021 question. Here it is given that G is a group of order 6. So G is a group of order 6 and H is a subgroup of G. So H is a subgroup of G which is having order greater than 1 and less than 6. So H is having order either greater than 1, strictly greater than 1 and less than 6. Now which one of the following option is correct? Option A is saying that both G and H are cyclic. And similarly, like they are asking about cyclicity and other options also. Okay, so let's solve this question using the Lagrange theorem. So we know, according to the Lagrange theorem, that if H is a subgroup of G, then order of H must divide order of G, right? This is what Lagrange theorem says. It is given that order of G is 6. Now what are the possible options for with us for order of H? Order of H could be 1 because 1 divides 6. It could be 2 because 2 divides 6. It could be 3 because 3 divides 6. It cannot be 4, right? Because 4 does not divide 6. Similarly, it cannot be 5. Why? Because 5 does not divide 6. So it could be 6. So these are the possible orders for H. But it is given in the question that 1 and 6 cannot be ordered, right? Question says that order should be greater than 1 and less than 6. So 1 and 6 cannot be ordered. It is given in the question. Now we are left with only two choices, 2 and 3. So we come to the conclusion that order of H could be either 2 or 3. So here one thing is to note that order of H is always a prime number because 2 and 3 both are the prime numbers. So order of H is always a prime number. Now just by looking at the order of H, can we say about the cyclicity of H? Yes, we can say, right? We know that if a group is having prime order, then group is always cyclic, right? So here order of H is 2 or 3, which is always a prime number. So I can definitely say that H is a cyclic group. And what about G? Order of G is 6, which is not a prime number. So I cannot comment. G may be cyclic or may not be cyclic. Okay, it may be cyclic or may not be cyclic. Now if I go back to the options, then I will see that option A is saying that both G and H are cyclic, which is wrong. B is saying that G is always cyclic, but H may not be cyclic, which is also wrong. So C is correct option because it is saying that G may not be cyclic, but H is always cyclic, right? H is always cyclic.
Let's solve this question. So in this question, it is given that there are 6 jobs with different difficulty level, okay, distinct difficulty level, and there are 3 components with distinct processing speeds. So let's assume that J1, J2, J3, J4, J5, and J6. These are the 6 jobs that we have, and J2 is difficult than J1. Similarly, J3 is difficult than J2, and we are arranging this in the increasing order of difficulty. Okay, increasing order of difficulty. Suppose, and they are saying that there are 3 components with distinct processing speeds. Let's suppose the components are C1, C2, and C3, where C2 is more powerful than C1 and C3 is more powerful than C2, and we are arranging in this way. Now, what is the question? The question is that the fastest computer or the fastest component gets the toughest job. Means that here J6 is the toughest job, and C3 is the fastest component for computer. Now they are saying that fastest computer should get the toughest job. So I will say that J6 should go to C3 only, right? Because this is what is given in the question. The fastest computer gets the toughest job and the slowest computer gets the easiest job. Means that J1 should be scheduled at C1 only. So this is the condition that is given to us. And what is the next point? Next point is saying that every computer gets the at least one job. Means like let's consider a scenario, okay, that C1, C2, C3, there are three computers that we have. Now J1 is fixed that I need to give to C1 and J6 is fixed that I need to give to C3. Now what about this J2, J3, J4 and J5? So I can give all of these jobs here, J2, J3, J4, J6, J5, right? Or this is the one option. Second option could be like I can give J1 here, 1 and 2, 3, 4, 3 here probably, like because 1 and 6 are fixed, okay, 1 and 6 are fixed, I cannot change them. And what about the remaining 4 and 5 I can give here. So there are various possible options that I can schedule the jobs where 1 and 6 are fixed, right? But we need to make sure that every computer gets at least one job. Means that this kind of possibility is not there where this C1, C2, C3, there are three components, and I cannot say that one. I cannot say that 1, 2, 3, suppose 4 is here and 5, 6 is here. Why? Because in this case, C2 is not getting any job. This component is not getting any job. That is why I cannot schedule like this. This is the condition that is given in the question, that every computer should get at least one job. Now they are asking the number of ways it can be done. Okay, so I hope the problem is clear to us, but let me quickly repeat the question. What they are saying that there are six jobs: J1, J2, J3, J4, J5, and J6. Where let's assume that we have arranged the jobs in the increasing level of difficulty, and there are three computers: C1, C2, and C3. Where let's assume that we have arranged these computers in the increasing level of processing power. Now it is fixed that I need to schedule this J1 to C1 and J6 to C3. This is the fix. Now they are asking that number of ways I can schedule all of the jobs. So basically here J1 and J6 are fixed. So I'm just assuming that we need to arrange these J2 to J5 jobs in such a way that no computer should be empty. Means that every computer should get at least one job, right? So this kind of scenario is not possible. This is the question. Now let's find out the total number of possible ways if the condition is not there. If that condition is not there, that every this second point, right? This second point is saying that every computer should get at least one job. Let's suppose this condition is not there. Then what are the total possibilities for arranging this four jobs J2 to J5? See, this J2 has three options. Either I can schedule it to C1, C2, and C3. So it has three options. Similarly, J3 has three options, J4 has three options, and J5 has three options, right? Here I am assuming that there is no condition like that every computer gets at least one job. This kind of condition is not there. If this kind of condition is not there, then I have three options for each of the remaining job. So total possibilities are 3 power 4. Is this clear? Because for every job I have three options. That's why total possibilities are 3 power 4. Right? Now, now why I have calculated this? That's the question. Because I need to calculate the total number of ways where every computer should get at least one job. So what are the total possible such ways? I can write total ways that is asked in question, that every computer should get at least one job is equal to total number of ways minus C2 doesn't get any job, right? So this kind of options that like we want to eliminate, right? So what we can do, we can find out the total number of ways minus C2 doesn't get any job. Because C1 and C3 are always getting at least one job. So we do not need to care about C1 and C3. We just need to care about the C2, right? That C2 get at least one job. So these are the total number of ways where C2 get at least one job. C2 gets at least one job, right? Because I do not need to care about C1 and C3. They are always getting at least one job. So C2 get at least one job out of J2 to J5. Because these are the only jobs I can schedule to C2. J1 and J6 are not possible to be scheduled at C2. Is this question clear? So this is the desired answer that they want to calculate us. So this is we have already calculated, that is 3 power 4. Now what is the second quantity? C2 doesn't get any job. If C2 is not getting any job, then every of this J2, J3, J4 and J5 only have two options. Either I can schedule it to C1 or I can schedule it to C3. So every of this job has two options only. So I can say if C2 doesn't get any job, then there are 2 power 4 possible options where C2 doesn't get any job. That is why if I need to find out that C2 gets at least one job, this is equal to total possible ways minus C2 doesn't get any job. So total possible ways are 3 power 4 minus where C2 doesn't get any job are 2 power 4, which is 81 minus 16, which is 65, right? Yeah, that is the answer.
Let's see this question. In this question, they are saying that R is a relation and it is said to be circular if A is related to B and B is related to C. If this happens, if that's the case, then we have C is related to A. Okay, it means that if A is related to B and B is related to C, then we have C is related to A, right? It is a if condition. If this happens, then we have C is related to A. Which of the following option is or are correct? Let's see what they are asking. If you notice, then they are asking like if we combine this circular, this symmetric, does it become equivalent? If we combine reflexive and symmetric, then does it become equivalence relation? If we combine transitive and circular, then does it become equivalent? Similarly, if we combine reflexive and circular, then does it become equivalence relation? So basically, they are asking then when does the relation becomes a equivalence relation, right? That's what they are asking. Okay, I think they are involving circular everywhere, right? They are involving circular here, they are involving circular relation here, they are involving circular here, but they are not involving in C option. So C option is saying that if a relation is reflexive and symmetric, then it is a equivalence relation. So I think this option is incorrect. Why? Because equivalence relation definition itself says like it should be reflexive, it should be symmetric, and it should be transitive, right? Then only it will be equivalence relation. But they are saying that if reflexive and symmetric, then it is equivalence relation. So this is wrong. But we can also prove it. Like we can check why this reflexive and symmetric does not imply the transitive property, right? So see, consider a relation like this: A comma A, B comma B, C comma C. Okay, and let's say A comma B, B comma A. I have making it symmetric, and suppose I also have B comma C and C comma B. Okay, making it symmetric. So suppose this is a relation that we have. Now, is this relation reflexive? Yes, this is reflexive. Is this relation symmetric? Yes, this is symmetric. Is this relation transitive? Let's check. See here, A is related to B, A is related to B, and B is related to C. But we don't have anything something like A is related to C, A related to C. This kind of tuple we don't have in this relation. That is why it is not transitive. And if since it is not transitive, that's why it is not equivalent relation. So that is why C is not a correct answer. C is incorrect, right? C is incorrect. Now let's see all other options. All other options are involving circular. They are saying that what do we add in circular to make it equivalent relation, right? So let me go to new page. Now they are saying that what to add to circular. What to add to circular, which type of relation should I add? Let's say X type, and then it will make it equivalence relation. So suppose if I add symmetric here, if I add symmetric, X equal to symmetric, if I add symmetricity in the circular relation, then does it become a relation, equivalence relation? Let's see. Suppose there is a relation, this A comma I. Is it circular relation? Since there is only one pair, yes, this is circular. Is it symmetric? Yes, this is symmetric. So this relation is circular and symmetric. Does this make this relation is an equivalence relation? Since this relation is not reflexive, right? Not reflexive. Because for reflexive, every pair should be there. Every pair like A, B, B, these all pairs should be there. A, B, B, C, C. These all pairs should be there to make it reflexive. Since this relation is not even reflexive, so I can say it is not equivalence relation, right? It is not equivalence relation because it is not even reflexive. So let's see which option is saying about it. If we add symmetric, does it make it equivalence relation? So of course this is incorrect because it does not even make it reflexive, right? So this is the incorrect option. Okay, let's see if we add transitive to the circular. If we add transitive, let's see what happens. If X equal to transitive, then let's consider the same example A comma I. Okay, this is circular plus this is transitive, right? This is circular and transitive. Is it equivalence relation? First of all, it is again not a reflexive relation, right? So this is not even reflexive. That is why I can say this is not equivalent relation. Okay. So let's say yeah, option D is incorrect. Why? Because this is not even a reflexive relation, right? Yeah. So option D is incorrect. What about option A? Option A is saying that if reflexive and circular makes it equivalence. Let's see. If X is reflexive, if X is reflexive, then does it make it equivalence relation? If X is reflexive. Okay. Let's see an example. To make it reflexive, I need to add all such pairs A comma A, B comma B, B comma B, C comma C, right? Okay. Now this relation is reflexive and this is circular also, but I'm adding some more pairs to illustrate it clearly. Let's suppose I'm adding A comma B and B comma C. Then since it is a circular relation, then I need to add C comma A, right? C comma A. So if I do like this, does this become equivalence relation? Let's check. See, let me erase this. Okay, let me erase this. See, this relation is circular relation. So if I have A to B and B to C, then I need to have C to A, right? Yes, this is given. Now let's first see whether it is symmetric or not. See, if I have A to A, since this is reflexive, so I have A to A, and I already have A to B. Okay, suppose I have A to B, then do I have B to A? Yes, I do have B to A. Why? Because this is a circular relation. So I need to have B to A also, right? I need to have B to A also because this is a circular relation. So this is why this kind of relation, this kind of tuple is also there. So B to A is also there. So what I'm saying, if A to B is there and and this is reflexive and circular, right? Then I can say that B2A is also there, right? I can say like this. Means this is symmetric relation, right? Now, since this is a symmetric relation, then can I say it is also a transitive relation? See, circular is saying that A to B, then B to C. If this happens, then I should be having C to A. And since I have C to A, and it is a symmetric relation, then I should be having A to C, right? I should be also having A to C. So if I have A to B and B to C, then I am having A to C, right? Why? Because this is already a symmetric relation, and I already have C to A because of circular property. I'm already having C to A because of circular property, and since it is symmetric, that's why I have A to C because of symmetricity, right? So I can say it is a transitive relation. So that is why this relation is equivalence relation. Why? Because this is reflexive, this is symmetric, and this is transitive. So that is why I can say that option A is correct. Okay, let's solve this question. So this question is saying that there is a graph G which is a undirected, unweighted connected graph. Okay, and the diameter of G is defined as this. The diameter of a graph G is basically maximum among all the shortest paths between U and B. Okay, first let me clearly define the diameter and then we will proceed further. Okay, so let's suppose there is one graph, something like that. Mm, yeah, something like that. So if I want to know the diameter of this graph G, right, diameter of this graph G, then I will say that what is the shortest distance between any two node, and I need to take the maximum among all the shortest distance. So if I, okay, let me mark it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and if I need to find out the shortest distance between 1 and 2, then I will say it is only 1, right? Because this is unweighted graph, so I'm assuming that every weight is 1. So distance is basically nothing but the how many edges are coming in between, the length of that path. Okay, so between 1 and 2 only one edge is coming, so I will say the distance between 1 and 2 is 1. So I will ask, if I ask the dis- distance between 1 and 5, then there are two paths I can see, like either I can go by this way or I can go by this way, right? I can go by this way, and both are giving me the distance as 2. Okay, so and if I go via this way, let's suppose if I go via this way to 5, then this is giving me a distance which is greater than 2, but I'm only interested in the shortest distance. So that is why I will say the shortest distance between 1 and 5 is 2. Similarly, shortest distance between 1 and 2 is 1. And what is the maximum among the all shortest distance that we need to find out? So if we see that what is the shortest distance between 1 and 4? Okay, this is 1, 2, 3, right? I think this is 3. We cannot go in lesser than 3 edges, right? So this is 3, right? And similarly, we can find out the shortest distance between every pair of vertices, and then we will see that the shortest distance, if we take the maximum among all the shortest distance, then it will be 3 only. So the diameter of this graph G is 3. Okay. Now let's consider another graph, maybe a slight modification to this graph only. Let's consider this graph. Let me erase it. Yeah. So here, if I ask you what is the diameter of this graph, let's call it G2. Okay, what is the diameter of this graph? Then you will say that okay, let's find out the maximum shortest distance between any pair of vertices. Okay, what is the shortest distance between 1 and 4? I can say that it is 3. But what is the shortest distance between 4 and 6? I will say that okay, this is I think 4, right? We cannot go in lesser than 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? We cannot go in lesser than 4. So this is 4. So if we try to find out shortest distance between every pair of vertices, and if we take the maximum among all these shortest distance, then we will see the diameter is of G2 is 4. This is the maximum shortest distance that we can have in this graph G2, right? So I think diameter is clear. Okay. Now let's go back to the question. The question is saying that there is a graph G, which is the diameter of that graph is defined like this, and M is the adjacency matrix of G. Okay, and then they are defining another graph G2. In this graph, they are saying the adjacency matrix is defined like this. Adjacency matrix is N, and it is defined like this. Okay, it is N. Okay, it is defined like this. Where what they are saying that if we have originally any edge between I and j, means that if mij is greater than 0, means originally if we have any edge between I and j, then also I have a edge between I and j. Okay, so suppose like this condition is not there, suppose this condition is not there, suppose for a moment this condition is not there, then what this is saying that if there is any edge between I and j that was in original graph G, then the similar edge is present in G2 also. So if this condition is not there, then G and G2 are actually same. There is no difference between G and G2, right? If this condition is not there. But what they are saying, like we have added this one more condition, and this will modify our G2. So what they have added, let's try to see. They have said that if we have any entry in M square, okay, this Pij is basically nothing but M square. P is nothing but M square. If M square Ij is greater than 0, then also I have an edge in G2. So what is this M square, right? Let's first see what is this M square. So M square is a square of the adjacency matrix of G, right? M square is a square of the adjacency matrix of G, means 2 times multiplying the M. Now we will be computing the M square. Now we can check that in M square, whatever is the entry, okay, this entry, if this entry is non-zero, it means the non-zero entry of M square the represents that there is a two length path in G, two length path in G, right? So what I mean to say, see, let's suppose that there is a graph, okay, and as you can see that there is no two length path from this vertex to this vertex, right? 1 to 3. There is no two length path, right? So if you try to find out M square, then M square of 1 3, M square of 1 3, this entry, M square of 1 3, this entry, right? This entry will be 0. Why? Because there is no two length path. If there is a two length path between any two vertices, let's suppose, is there any two length path between 1 and 2? There is no two length path, right? There is no two length path between 1 and 2. So that is why this entry will be also 0. What about 1 and 1? Since there is a two length path, I can go from 1 to 2 and then come from 2 to 1. So this entry will be non-zero, right? This entry will be non-zero. These two entry will be 0. We can quickly check it. See, M for this graph will be what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? So I have 1 to 1. There is no edge between 1 to 1, that is why it is 0. 1 to 2 is 1, 1 to 3 is 0, 1 to 4 is 0, 1 to 5 is 1, right? Similarly, I can have 2 to 1. 2 to 1 is what? 1. And let's try to fill this column. What is 1 to 3? 0. What is 1 to 4? 0. What is 1 to 5? 1, right? So if we find the M square will be nothing but M into N, right? So if I multiply this matrix with the same matrix M, then let's see what we are getting. We need to multiply this row, this first row with this first column, right? With this first column. So what we are getting, if we multiply, then we will be getting 0 plus 1 plus 0 plus 0 plus 1. This is nothing but 2. So it is basically 1 into 1, 1 comma 1 entry, which is 2. And this entry is non-zero, right? This entry is non-zero. So I can say that there is path length of 2 exists between 1 and 1. Why? Because m square entry of 1 and 1 is non-zero. Okay. So this is what m square represents. Now what they are saying that we have added in G2, we have added extra edges. Like whatever edges in G are already present, because I'm just copying this Mij. If Mij is greater than 0, then I'm having 1. But we have added extra edges, and extra edges something look something like this, that if there is a path length of 2 in G, then we have a edge in G2. So what do I mean? So let's suppose this is G. Let's suppose this is G, and if we try to plot G2, okay, this is G, and let's try to plot G2. Okay, G2 will be here. So in G2, what they are saying, like if there is any path length of 2, then there will be an edge in G2, direct edge. Okay, so we are already copying all the edges. We are already copying all the edges. This is already there in G2. We are already copying all the edges. And apart from this, we are also having some extra edges. If there is a path length 2, so tell me, is there any path length 2 between 1 and 1? Yes, like we can go from 1 to 2 and then 2 to 1. So that is why there is a path length of 2 between 1 and 1. That is why I have a direct edge between 1 and 1 here. So this will be self loop. So tell me, is there any path length between 1 and 4? Path length of 2 between 1 and 4? Yes, this is there, right? So I will be having direct edge between 1 and 4, right? Is there any path length of 2 between 2 to 5? Yes, we have. That's why in G2 we have the direct edge, right? So this is how we can form G2 from G. Now given G, we have G2. Now we want to talk about the diameters of G and G. Diameters of G and diameters of G2, how they are related. See, if we have direct edge for every path length 2, so now consider the maximum shortest path in G. Suppose this is the maximum shortest path in G. This is the maximum shortest path in G. Now for every two hop, I have the direct edge, right? For every two hop, I have the direct edge. That is why this diameter will reduce to y2. So diameter of G will reduce to 2 in G2, right? So that is why let's see which option should be correct. Now if you see, then diameter of G2, no, like diameter of G will be certainly less than G2 will be certainly less than G, but it won't be greater than diameter of G by 2, right? So okay, this option, yeah, B option is correct, because diameter of G2 should be less than or equal to diameter of G upon 2, right? Yeah. Let's solve this question. In this question, they are saying that G is undirected connected planar graph. Okay. And they are further saying that there are 8 vertices and 5 faces. Okay. So number of vertices are 8 and number of faces, let me denote it by F, are 5. And they are asking about the number of edges. So we know for undirected connected planar graph, we know there is a Euler formula that says that number of faces F should be equal to E, that is number of edges, minus V, that is number of vertices, plus 2. Now number of faces that is given is 5, equal to number of edges are, like they want to ask us number of edges, and number of vertices are given, that is 2 plus 2. Number of vertices are 8. And from this we can easily calculate E equal to 11. So number of edges is 11. Easy question, right? Yeah. Let's go to the next question. Okay, so in this question, they are asking about S1 and S2, which one is tautology, right? So there are two formulas are given and they are asking about tautology. Let's see. So we know any formula that is alpha imply beta is tautology if and only if that formula is always true. This formula should always be true, right? Always. So now, given this S1, when can you say that this S1 is tautology or not? Similarly for S2, we can say whether these formulas are always true or not. Let's see. S1 is negation of P and P or Q imply Q, right? Okay. This is a formula of the form alpha imply beta, right? Alpha imply beta. Now, when can I say that this formula is true? I can say this formula is always true only if this formula is always true only if we do not have any combination such that I can make alpha true and at the same time I should not be making beta to be false. Getting my point? If, okay, see, if you are given alpha imply beta and if you are able to make this alpha to be true and at the same time you are able to make this beta to be false, suppose, then this alpha imply beta should be false, will be false, right? Suppose there is no combination such that alpha is true and at the same time beta is false, then I will say this formula is always true, okay? And then if this formula is always true, then I will say that this is tautology. Clear? So let's check if we are able to make this true false combination in S1. Okay. What is S1? Not of P and P or Q imply Q. Okay, let me rewrite it here. Not of P and P or Q imply Q. Right? Okay. Let's check whether I can make true false combination or not. Okay. For making true false combination, it is clear that I need to make Q to be false. So let's make Q to be false. Okay. Now, if Q is false, then let's check about this LHS part. Let me call it LHS. Okay. Let's check about this LHS part. Now, if Q is false and I need to make it true. Okay. So I can say that P or Q and where Q is false is always P, right? Because Q is false. So P or false is always P. So this is nothing but P. And now this LHS becomes not of P and P, right? So not of P and P, can I make it true? Can I make it true or is this always false? See, if P is true, if P is true, then it will be false and true. Then it will be false. If P is false, then it will be true and false. Then again it will be false, right? So I'm not able to make it true, right? See, given that LHS is false, Q is false, I am not able to make this LHS to be true. Given that RHS is false, right? If Q is false, then I cannot make this LHS true. Why? Because this LHS is reducing to not of P and P. And this complete thing is always false, regardless of whether P is having value true or false. This complete thing is always false. That is why this LHS is always false if Q is false. So while I'm making Q false, I'm not able to make this LHS part to be true, right? True is not possible. While I'm making this to be false, right? So basically, I can say that in S1, if S1 is from alpha imply beta, then true false combination doesn't exist. It means if true false combination doesn't exist, it means that this formula is always true. This means that this formula is tautology, right? This formula is tautology. What about S2? S2 is given as Q imply not of P and P or Q. So I think this is similar to S1, just that they have reversed the LHS and RHS part, right? Let's check whether S2 is tautology or not. So to see whether it is tautology or not, what I need to do, I need to check whether I am able to make true false combination. Let's see. To make this true false combination, I can quickly make Q to be true. While I am making Q to be true, can I make it false? Let's check. If Q is true, then first tell me what is P or Q. If Q is true, then it will be always true, right? It will be always true. P or Q is always true. So I am having not of P and true. This will be what? This will be nothing but not of P. So can I make this not of P false by choosing any value of P? Yes, if I choose P to be true, then not of P will be false, right? Not of P will be false. So I can make this true false combination in S2. I'm able to drive the true false combination. On which value of P and Q? If I set P to be false, sorry, P to be true and Q to be true, Q is also true and P is also true, then I can say that this LHS is true, at the same time this RHS is false. And in this case, this complete formula S2 is false. That's why S2 is not a tautology. So which one is the answer? S1 is a tautology, but S2 is not a tautology. Yes, B is the answer, right?